Thank you. Yeah, I think it's on now. Good morning. How are you all doing? The children, let's just appreciate the children and the teachers. Yay! So we love children here. I was in this church when we just had 2 children. Just 2. Now some of the children who are age mates of those 2 children are now teaching in Sunday school now. We thank God for that. And every season we love to pray for the children, have them participate over here, and even dedicate the children. And so if you have a child and you'd like the child dedicated, here what we do is that we bring the children to the Lord. In Mark chapter 10 and verse 13 to 16 says, "Let the children come to me." And so by bringing them over here in the service, what we're doing is that we're saying, we're bringing them before the Lord, and we're saying, let's all have a multi-generational experience together. Now, if you have a child and you'd like the child dedicated, actually, you could do it even now. I'm happy to dedicate children right now. But if not, you can always talk to one of our pastors, and we can arrange so that the child can be dedicated, for before the Lord as we bless them. One of the things that we do as well is that not only do we bring the children to the Lord, but we also bring the parents so that we can all learn together. We have an experience called Leah, which allows us to be able to learn how to bring up the children in the training and instruction of the Lord. Now, we are going through this series. Let me say, my name is Kiama Mogambi, and I'm one of the pastors and a member of this congregation right from the beginning. And with my wife here, let me just do like what pastors like to say, Let me invite my wife to just stand and wave to everybody. She's the lady responsible for my children's good looks and brains. So, yes, mimi nililete jina. Yeah, so we are going through a series beyond the Manger, and we are reflecting on what happened on the very first Christmas and understand how we should respond to that. And last Sunday, we talked about how you perceive something determines how you engage with it. And we found out that now that the king is born, we have a decision to make. And the decision that we make is we must choose whether to follow him or not to participate in his kingdom at all. Now, it's always good when you hear a sermon, you go and think about it. Now, what happened is that on my way home from the service last Sunday, it occurred to me, and my wife knows this one, it occurred to me that this sermon can help us understand the recent turbulence with Gen Z. Ask me how. I will explain in just a moment. The thing about Gen Z, there are different opinions. There are some people who think that this whole Gen Z maneno is just young people being young people. Did you hear that one? It's young people being young people, a lot of zeal, youthful zeal and passion. Ulisikia kitu kama hiyo? Me, I've heard that one. And then there's another one. I'm sorry to say, fellow ministers and men and women of the cloth, they said that this unrest is a symptom of pepo chafu. Did you see that, Nene? There was like a clip going around. Someone saying pepo chafu. Even the highest officers insinuated about that pepo chafu, dirty spirit. And they declare that this unrest needs to be come out. You know that one? It needs to be cleansed, exorcised. Now, last Sunday's message for me provided an important key in understanding the root of this unrest. Ask me how again. If we pay close, let me tell you how. If we pay close attention to this turbulence, it's an indication of mental and spiritual dissonance. Big word, dissonance. Let me explain what that dissonance is. On the one hand, as Christians especially, we have some sort of an inkling of what the kingdom should look like, what a kingdom should look like, what kind of leadership should be there, how leadership should behave, and things like those, isn't it? But on the other hand, what we are seeing is different from the vision. How the leadership is behaving, some of the decisions that are made is different from the vision that we find in Scripture and that is somehow inherent in our hearts because we are made in the image of God. When there is that dissonance, sometimes that dissonance makes people feel a sense of angst. Unasikia kitu inside. Sometimes that thing even spills over to the streets. And I would like to argue and say that I think actually it is even necessary for it to spill into the streets. This unrest is not actually a very negative thing, in my view. In fact, I think it can be constructive. Nasema vibaya, niendelee ama nisiendelee? This is not the first time in history that people have rallied against leadership because what they saw and the vision that they have is different. It's not the first time. It happened even in the Bible. It is there. The reason why it's not negative, and I think it's important for us to understand this, the Gen Z unrest that we had a few months ago, and unless things change, we might have again, reminds us, especially for us as Christians, how far our leaders deviate from God's pattern of leadership. So it's not a pepo chafu. Actually, it could very well be the stirring of the Holy Spirit. Tuko pamoja? Today we're going to dig a little deeper. Let's go deeper. But before we go deeper, let me ask the obvious. I want to ask question of the day for you to ask your neighbor and to discuss. What situation in the news this week made you just roll your eyes? Share with your neighbor. I can already see people rolling their eyes. And me, I'll be the first one to share. Okay. Let's hear. We can hear some comments from the floor. Let's hear some comments from the floor. Actually, let me share my first one. Me, I don't even have to go from the week. No, I don't even go to the week. This is in the news today. I'm just reading the newspaper. I read it. Let's have a eye-rolling moment. Audit reveals plundered loans, waste of billions in mega projects. Rolling the eyes. Kuna zingine, lakini let's hear from the floor.
Those complaining. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Those complaining about the airport have never stepped in the airport.
The people who are complaining, complaining about the airport have never even stepped in the airport. What hubris is? I roll. In fact, all my 4 eyes are rolling back. To the cerebellum. Imefika hypothalamus hapo. Eye rolling moment. Yeah, another one.
There are women who wanted to protest in Mombasa for the femicides that are happening in the country. And then the police in Mombasa refused to give them a permit to protest. And I mean, it was, I don't know if it's eye rolling or anger.
So no permit for our sisters, our mothers, our daughters. Eyes rolling to the spinal cord. Another one. Eye rolling moment. There's another one over here in front here.
I think for me, it's the constant gaslighting.
Uh-huh.
This week when they told us that shift is working and you Kenyans, all you can do is complain, you have such a bad attitude. And you're just like, umenda kwa ground. I'm an mimi nimechizi because I'm like, I'm not dumb. But yeah, they keep gaslighting.
Rolling our eyes. Actually, everything is okay. See, tukiangalia tunaona everything is fine. Rolling back our eyes. Yeah, back to... There's so many things that we have come now to expect. In fact, we see them as normal in a earthly kingdom, even the kingdom that we have here today. Corruption, news of corruption, or something about corruption in the newspaper today. Vice, violence, disregard for the poor, pride, lack of humility, and everything in between. Power struggle, selfishness, absence of compassion, lack of forgiveness. All of those things, there are so many lists, and I'm sure whatever we were sharing with one another fits into that category. It has become so ingrained in us that it's actually a form of entertainment. I've never watched a full episode, even one episode of Game of Thrones, but that is what it is about. Yeah, well, I have a witness. That is what it is about. That is what a lot of the shows that we watch are about. Me, I'm a Star Wars person. Me, I'm a completely Star Wars. I've watched all the 9 movies, sometimes multiple times. That's what it is about, these very things. Jesus' arrival, however, introduced a completely different kind of kingdom, an upside-down kingdom. That is why we are talking about it here in church today. Jesus' coming is not just the beginning of a new religion, even though it was. It signals the establishment of a new kind of kingdom. And this kingdom came to transform societies. Every place that this kingdom have gone, every language, every nation, every generation, the kingdom of God has had an impact. It's a kingdom that doesn't stand for the things that we have just talked about today. It's not a kingdom for rolling back our eyes. It's not about power and control. It is a kingdom that stands for conscience, for compassion, and that is modeled by the King himself. Some of the statements we've had our leaders make are not statements that you can expect Jesus to make. This is what makes the kingdom stand out for us today and to stand out in the day and age. Now, this kingdom didn't start in a smooth way. It had a very chaotic beginning. The beginning of the kingdom was a chaotic period when Caesar Augustus had asked issued an edict for census. And this forced people to go to travel, different places. Wherever you are, you have to go to your ancestral home so that you can be counted. And in the midst of all that chaos, a child was born. And this child was a king, as we learned last Sunday. And that's what we learn. Matthew chapter 2 and verse 1 to 3. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea during the time of King Herod, some people called, depending on where you went to school, Manger, what else? Manger. From the east came from Jerusalem and asked, "Where is the one who has been born King of Jews? We saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him." When King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. He was disturbed, and then what happened? When the king is disturbed, all of Jerusalem is disturbed. When the king sneezes, everyone catches pneumonia. Herod then did a bit of research to find out from the scriptures. He did this kind of background research to know what is going on about the prophecies regarding this king. And then he called, verse 7. Then Herod called the Magi secretly and found out from them the exact time the star appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem and said, "Go and search carefully for the child. As soon as you find him, report to me so that I too may go and worship him." Rolling back. When the Magi arrived, they came with a typical mindset. Because this, in the typical mindset, of their time and even this time is that, where do you look for a king who is being born? You go to the palace. He was already planning, Herod was already planning his legacy. He was already planning how the chips would fall in terms of his consolidating his power. And the idea of a new king, especially one that would actually bring people from the east to come, was very threatening for him. So Herod was scared. He was bewildered. Who is it who can come from a small shag's place like Bethlehem? For those of us who are royal watchers, royal watchers. Let me tell you who royal watchers are. Those are the people who watched every minute of Prince Harry's wedding. Have you ever heard of people like those? There are people who watch Prince William's wedding. There are some other people who also sat down and watched the whole funeral proceedings. Those people are called royal watchers. Those people, if you are to tell you where a king is supposed to be born, they'll tell you a king is not born in shags. They are born in a palace with high arches and big seats and things like those. Bethlehem was a small, insignificant place, the last place that you expect for a king to be born. But nevertheless, a king was going to be born. So significant is that king that there was a star that rose to commemorate his birth. To protect his power, Herod devised a plan to eliminate the potential threat. That approach, he was going to remove whatever it is that this new power center was going to be. That is not new. That is typical of what you'd expect in a Game of Thrones episode. It's typical of what you'll see in some of the things that we see today. It's typical of what we see in governments today. Typical king, typical kingdom approach. For us, Herod's reaction highlights the difference between our earthly kingdoms and our understanding of earthly kingdoms and the kingdom that Jesus came to inaugurate. Earthly rulers like Herod and so and so fill in the blank for yourself. Earthly rulers like those see the news of a different leader as a threat. Herod wanted to know exactly all the details of this king so that he could execute a plan. This is not something new for him. He had executed different plans before. His family had found its way to lead the community in Israel, and he was working together with the superpower of the day, which is the Roman Empire. Jesus' kingdom was completely different. Jesus' kingdom invites us to look at a completely different way of power and control. This kind of kingdom is marked by humility, love, service, active participation, all of those things which Jesus himself, who's the leader of the kingdom, modeled. So there's a difference between these two different perspectives of the kingdom. The one that is built on power and control, and the other one that is built on humility, love, service, and the things that we celebrate as believers. The other thing that we learn from Herod's understanding and his life was his view of religion. Now, Herod's family was actually not originally Jewish. Herod's family came in and they took on power. But as they took on power, for them, they tried to get into the Jewish religion. And so they understood it. They understood the whole idea of sacrifices. They understood the idea of the significance of the temple. So much so that Herod took out his own money and raised taxes so that they could build the temple in Jerusalem. In fact, when they rebuilt it, it was known as Herod's temple. For Herod, religion was about ritual. Create a space, people bring in sacrifices, and they worship over there. They do that thing called religion. That thing called religion has no impact whatsoever on his choices and the way that he lived his life. It had nothing to do with submission to the God of that temple. Herod could offer sacrifices, but there's no evidence for us that he was actually willing to obey and submit himself to the God of those sacrifices. That is not new. How many people do you know who go to churches, but their leadership does not reflect the God of those places where they go? Bwana Yesu asifiwe. Selah. Herod's response to the birth of the king of the Jews shows us just how little he understood the God of this religion. Matthew 2 and verse 16, we see that Herod responded to this news by murdering all the boys 2 years and younger in Bethlehem and the surrounding area. This infanticide shows the cruelty and the injustice that is connected with our human story. It's a story of pain. It's a story of selfishness that repeats itself over and over again until it finds its way into our own entertainment. Now, someone would ask me, Kiama, why is it that we have such a cruel story in the Bible? After all, God is love. Why does our book have these kinds of stories? I wouldn't say that I have the full answer to that question. It will take a long time for us to discuss that, and many, many pages of reading to try and understand that. But what I do know for a fact is that as followers of Christ, we have a book. God has left us a book, the Bible, that teaches us to be honest about the world's pain, because this pain reminds us why Jesus was born in the first place. He's not just a savior from sin, but a king who represents a completely different kind of rulership, a new perspective for our own humanity. He represents the upside-down kingdom, what I call the upside-down kingdom. When Jesus came in, it's a complete opposite of the royal birth, what a royal birth should look like. It came in chaos. It came in from an insignificant place. If it hadn't been for the Magi, Joseph and Mary, are the only ones who would have known who Jesus was. They might not even have been noticed by the royal palace. But raising Jesus from this time became a dangerous life and death affair. In fact, that's somehow how Africa comes into that story. Because what's the song that we normally sing? We sing when Jesus, how does that song go? What? Yeah, when Jesus came down, he came down? No. Yeah, he came down to Israel. When there was trouble, then what happened? He came to Africa. That's how Africa comes in the story. Imagine. And then Africa comes again right at the end, at the cross as well. Africa is inside there, but that's for another day. Upside down kingdom, completely different from what you would imagine in your mind. If someone were writing that story, they would have written that story differently. Completely different. And this upside down kingdom is a kingdom that challenges us, first of all, to submit to God and not to give ourselves to ritual sacrifice. The ancient religions of that part of the world show us that the gods of their time, as they understood them, didn't really care how people lived their life. There was nothing in there about, live with compassion, humility, all those kinds of things that we normally talk about and that we yearn for. That kind of religion only cared about sacrifices. You just go give the sacrifice. That's what the religion is about. People can go and sacrifice wherever they are. And Rome, the superpower at the time, didn't even care how or who people worshipped, as long as you pledged allegiance to Caesar and say Caesar is Lord. That's why Christians got into trouble, because they said instead of Caesar is Lord, they say Jesus is Lord. This new spiritual kingdom that Jesus came to inaugurate did not demand sacrifices. The followers of this religion said that the death of the king is in itself the only and final sacrifice. The king died as an atonement for sin and to inaugurate this new kingdom. This upside-down kingdom demanded submission to this risen king. Instead of calling for sacrifices, every so often, it's a kingdom that met together one day every week to live a completely different kind of life and encourage people to live that life. It's a kind of kingdom that encourages people to have a concern for the poor instead of trying to exalt and to worship the emperor. Those days, people would swear allegiance to the king. Like I said, they would say, Caesar is Lord. People would bow down to the emperor, and people who are politicians would want to bow down to the emperor and pay homage to him so that they could get power, as if that is new. Rolling the eyes. Christians would do the opposite. Christians would not bow to the emperor. They would not pay homage to the emperor. They are concerned with the lowly. They are not concerned with the emperor and the high and the mighty. They lived a life that was completely unheard of. They were generous and they gave freely to people without expecting anything in return. Wealthy Christians or Christians who had something to give would give money and even material goods to those who needed it. They carried one another's burdens. They forgave those who wronged them instead of exacting revenge. They extended grace to others, and instead of visiting temples to sacrifice, they would meet in homes weekly, singing songs of gratitude and talking about Jesus the King. These Christians lived in a different way. Now, back those days, people would leave their religion and they would say, these are the religious things, the sacrifices and those kinds of things, but this is my life. They would have a secular, there would be a secular part of their lives, and then there would be a part now for the spiritual things. That is not very, it's not very new in the sense that it has been happening up to today. There's I think one of our own leaders, several of our own leaders said that the people in church should do their things in church, and then us over here, we do our things here. Did anyone see that piece of news? And so the priests and the pastors should stop talking so much about these politics things. Even those days it used to happen. That's what we call a dualist living. Separating the things that are of faith from the things that are secular. The Christians did not live like that. The Christians at the time understood that when Jesus came, he called us to be in the world, but not of it. The Christians actually merged together their lives, and the values that they understood from their religious life were mixed together with the lives that they lived on a day-to-day basis. Upside-down kingdom. The Christians modeled a different kind of way of relating with one another. They modeled a shared humanity instead of living in a divided world. The Christians lived together as human beings under God's lordship. Their allegiance to God in this kingdom removed the distinctions that we normally divide one another with. The Apostle Paul actually breaks it down for us in the book of Ephesians. And he says, Jesus broke down the distinctions of ethnicity so that there's neither Jew nor Gentile. Broke down the distinctions of gender. There's neither male nor female. Broke down the distinctions of social class. There's no slave or free. These categories of division became irrelevant in their lives as they worshipped their King Jesus. And they should be relevant for us. Those who go to the airport are just as human as those who don't go to the airport. Bwana Yesu asifiwe. No class distinctions. Even slave owners called their slaves brother and sister in very much the same way as those who are elected, and those who elect should call one another brother and sister. Bwana Yesu asifiwe. This kingdom was a kingdom where the followers, and this is really important for us, where the followers are not just subjects of a king, but they are joint heirs with their King Jesus. This is a different kind of kingdom. Peter, one of the disciples, wrote about this kingdom saying, you are now joint heirs in his kingdom. Jesus is the king of his kingdom, but we are joint heirs together with him. For us, our king is not just a religious figure, he's a revolutionary, a figure who invites us into sonship and kinship together with him. He's a leader who called us and calls us to submit, yes, to governing authorities, just as he had done. But he called us to live with a higher standard than those who govern over them, because we are a royal priesthood. Jesus was born and grew up and taught about this upside-down kingdom. When he was arrested, he did not fight or rally his followers against government. Instead, he surrendered himself to God. And in surrendering himself to God, God exalted him above the earthly governments. This is the kind of kingdom that we celebrate in this season of Christmas. It's a kingdom that isn't just a religion. It's a revolution. It's a disruptive culture within our cultures. In fact, it was so disruptive in those days in places like Ephesus that in Acts chapter 19, there was a riot because there were believers who lived their life according to this kingdom. Now, last week, we asked, if Jesus is king, is he my king? And we said that a choice needs to be made about who will be king in our lives. Today we see that those who choose Jesus as their king choose to participate in an upside-down kingdom. It is not just a religion of forgiveness that changed the world. It's a radical following after the king and the values of this kingdom. This is a kingdom that has shaped all the cultures in some way that it has encountered. It is a kingdom that has done things that cultures don't normally do, elevated the status of women, the value of women, cared for orphans. It's concerned about the poor. It speaks on behalf of the widows. It challenges governments. It overturns cultural norms. People in this kingdom see themselves as stewards of God's resources for the benefit of others. If Jesus is king, is he your king? If he is your king, are you a participant in his upside-down kingdom? Are you committed as a member of this kingdom to submit yourself to God, to be concerned for the poor, to live a holistic faith that is not separated, secular and sacred? Are we committed to celebrating our shared humanity, removing the distinctions and the divisions that are among us? Do we see ourselves as having a heavenly heritage, as joint heirs with Jesus? As we come to a conclusion, I'm inviting us to reflect on this kingdom and the way we live our lives. It's a kingdom that calls us to a high standard. God doesn't call us to perfection in living this kingdom, but he calls us to a commitment to make an effort to live under its values. Perfection is not the goal. Commitment is the goal. I want to invite us, as we come to a conclusion, I want to invite you to take a moment now and pray. The children led us in a point of confession. What is it about this kingdom, from what we've talked about today, that challenges you to a higher standard? What is it about this kingdom that challenges you to modify or change or improve the way you live your life? I invite you just now, just to allow the Holy Spirit to search your heart